Hello, everyone. Welcome to this City Parks Alliance webinar about how green stormwater infrastructure, what we call GSI, in parks can be a win-win for urban resilience. I'm Gideon Berger, the program manager for City Parks Alliance, and together with Rachel Bennett, the director of health equity at MIG, we'll be moderating today's discussion and sharing some of the new resources about GSI in parks that the Alliance has just published in collaboration with our partners at the U.S. Water Alliance and Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange. Support for this webinar and this initiative comes from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. About 13 months ago, at the U.S. Water Alliance's One Water Summit in Tucson, we launched the Parks and Green Stormwater Infrastructure Initiative, working with a cohort of parks and stormwater agency leaders from 8 cities across the country to inform how to increase collaboration between parks and stormwater management and address historic inequities. The cohort cities include Atlanta, Boston, Houston, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, Raleigh, Seattle, and Tucson. And today you'll be hearing from 2 of them, Tucson and Boston. This initiative was a great opportunity for us to delve into one of our strategic topics here at City Parks Alliance, climate resilience in parks, with a focus on water, which is one of our 3 areas that we're focusing on pertaining to parks and climate. The other 2 are heat and biodiversity. When we started, we weren't sure whether the subject of parks and GSI would be of broad interest or maybe more of a niche topic. So it's really gratifying to see so many of you here today, along with the great attendance we've had at sessions we've done in person at the One Water Summit in 2023 and at Greater and Greener in 2024. So with that context, let me introduce today's featured presenters. Greg Jackson is the Deputy Director of Capital Projects for the Tucson Parks and Recreation Department. Moved into this position to oversee implementation of Prop 407, which is a $225 million Parks and Connections bond. And he has over 25 years of parks and recreation experience, working primarily in large urban park systems, also in Florida and North Carolina. Blue Baldwin manages the Storm to Shade program at the city of Tucson, which builds and maintains green stormwater infrastructure on public property throughout the city, with a focus on equity and investment in historically underserved areas. Prior to that, she coordinated an academically integrated garden and ecology program in Arizona's 2nd largest school district. Kate England is director of the Office of Green Infrastructure at the City of Boston. She has a background in engineering, landscape architecture, planning, and policy, and has worked in the public sector in and around Boston for most of her career. Kate was appointed by Mayor Wu in July 2022 to facilitate widespread implementation of green infrastructure and help pursue the resilience goals outlined in Boston's Green New Deal. Before we get to their stories, I want to share some background on what exactly GSI is, why we are talking about it in parks, its potential connection with social equity, in addition to all of the co-benefits it brings for resilience and public health. And we'll also be highlighting some new publications and resources that the Alliance has created under this initiative. But first, some quick housekeeping items. We have a great turnout today. It's fantastic. So to ensure that we can respond to everyone with questions or technical difficulties, here are some tips. To ask a question, click on the questions icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, type your question in, and click send. Feel free to send those throughout presentations, and just know we'll be holding them until the end. If you experience a technical problem during the presentation, just type it into the question box and one of our staff will respond to it. And if you miss something, don't worry. We're going to email you links to the recording and the presentation and any other resources that we said. It'll all be publicly available. We'll be following up with an email with all of that information. All right. So with that, I am going to start our introduction. All right. So what is green stormwater infrastructure anyway? Why are we talking about this? You see the 2 pictures on this screen. One is what you've probably seen after a big rain event in a park, lots of flooding. The other one is an example of green stormwater infrastructure at a park. That top one, traditional gray infrastructure, the things we know of, gutters, sewers, tunnels, often concrete, it moves water, but they can contribute to flooding, pollution, and urban heat because their job is to just move the water. But nature-based solutions like GSI use plants, soils, and permeable surfaces to manage and store stormwater where it falls naturally. And some of the benefits of using nature-based solutions like GSI are that it can boost urban climate resilience and increases and enhances our green spaces, and it can even lead to the creation of green jobs. So why are we talking about GSI in parks? Well, we all know as practitioners that there's an urgent need to adapt our infrastructure as our storm events have been becoming more intense and unpredictable. We also know as parks professionals that parks are the largest publicly controlled green spaces in our cities. So uh, they serve lots of important functions as infrastructure. They mitigate heat, they manage flooding, they deal with stormwater. Um, so they represent an incredible opportunity for putting GSI into our city's infrastructure. Um, when they are deployed, they also can enhance biodiversity and ecological health, as well as public health by reducing air and water pollution and the effect of urban heat, creating new green space, and positively impacting our public health and addressing things like respiratory and heat-related illness. So what's the connection between parks, GSI, and equity? Well, historically, discriminatory policies have limited housing access for minorities and immigrant groups and lower income families. And these communities tend to have, we know, less green space and are more prone to flooding and extreme heat and pollution. So GSI projects in existing or new parks in these communities can help address some of the environmental justice needs that they have and also create opportunities for workforce development and address public health disparities. But we've also learned in our work that it's crucial to pair those investments with community stabilization and economic development strategies to prevent displacement and secure long-term funding for maintenance, just like any other big infrastructure play that happens in your city. Oops. So there are some barriers as to why GSI is not sort of the way we a standard operating procedure in our parks today. And there are also some solutions we want to talk about today too. So why are parks often underutilized for GSI? Well, one of the biggest reasons is that there's a lack of shared vision and priorities among public agency leaders. We have two very different fields here that are in play, and they have different funding sources for starters, right? The capital projects for parks and funding for parks, as opposed to water projects. And as a result of that, we have silos between these agencies when it comes to planning and operation. On top of that, a lot of our policies and regulations are not necessarily supportive of interagency collaboration. It is more of the exception than the rule, and it can be a lot harder to do. There's also skepticism from various places about nature-based solutions. They're sort of newer in terms of our engineering experience, and we may have less data about their effectiveness as opposed to the centuries of gray infrastructure that we have been tracking and understand. And as a result of that, too, we have limited maintenance skills when it comes to maintaining green infrastructure, which is a challenge for us as well. There's also a lot of complexity in engaging communities in this kind of infrastructure work, especially historically disadvantaged ones. But we've learned that better collaboration between parks and stormwater agencies on funding, on community engagement, planning, capital projects, and maintenance can really allow cities to fully tap parks' potential for GSI and create this win-win when it comes to resilience, operational efficiencies, and even saving money. So we've learned a lot of this in this initiative from our cohort of 8 cities. You can see on this map where they're from. I mentioned them earlier, and all of the different agencies and nonprofits that have been involved in kind of sharing their work with us, along with our partners at the U.S. Water Alliance and the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange. And today on our website, there's a short URL at the bottom of the screen. You can go to City Parks Alliance/Stormwater. You can find 2 new publications that hopefully will be of great value to you. The first one you're looking at here is literally 2 pages, and this is really intended for elected officials, public agency leaders, folks who really need an overview to help make the case for nature-based solutions in parks like GSI. Goes over a lot of what I just summarized with you all. And the second one is more of a policy brief. It's about 30 pages or so, called Nature-Based Solutions for Managing Stormwater in Parks. Um, it speaks to what we call the 7 big benefits of implementing GSI in parks. So I'll just outline those for you here to kind of get you excited about it. But as we've been talking about, it helps protect vulnerable communities during large-scale weather events, can save cities money, reducing the impacts of flooding, improves public health, protecting water quality and adding green space to keep us cooler, advances environmental justice by benefiting historically underserved communities without adequate infrastructure, can provide a great opportunity for workforce development to fill the green infrastructure maintenance skill gap. It can transform how governmental agencies work together. You're going to hear a bit of that today from our presenters, as well as how they serve their communities and access new funding opportunities. And it can even help build trust between stakeholders and government to inspire more nature-based solutions at all levels. So this report, which we'll encourage you to go on the website and get, we'll be sending links to it directly after the webinar, has 17 kind of mini case study examples from around the country of projects and partnerships. And for each of these benefits, there's a call to action for public leaders and issue advocates. Okay, and stop sharing my screen. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Greg and Blue to talk about the remarkable green infrastructure work that they're partnering in Tucson's parks and public spaces, and how it aligns with their city's environmental policy goals and their community's strong conservation ethic. Just remember, as they go, type any questions into the question box, and we'll take those after our speakers present. Greg and Blue, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gideon. Are you seeing my screen? Just confirm.
We are, yes.
Awesome. So that's gonna be a good feedback or a good intro into part of our program, because we'll answer some of the questions and comments that Gideon just talked about. So I'm Greg Jackson, Deputy Director with the Tucson Parks and Recreation Department, and co-presenting with me today is Blue. Blue, are you on?
I am. Blue Baldwin with Tucson Water.
So you'll notice that we are from different departments. I'm with Parks and Recreation, Blue is with Tucson Water, but we're going to talk about Storm to Shade, which is really the city's green stormwater infrastructure program and how we got started. Just a little background, Tucson, if you're not familiar with it, we are in the middle of a desert, the Sonoran Desert, where it is really all about the heat. We have 4 months, May to August, where our average temperatures are over 90 degrees. June, July, and August, our average temperature is either 100 or above. And, we're one of the 3rd fastest warming cities in the US, right behind Las Vegas and Phoenix. Our stormwater projects are a little bit different than a lot of places. We only get 11 inches of rain a year. So we're really trying to look at how we can capture that rain and make sure we're utilizing it. So for us, it's about capturing that, but really shade is a hot commodity, as we'll talk about throughout the program. Just a little bit about our park department. We're not a huge department. We have 134 parks, a little less than 3,400 acres of parkland. When we look at trying to cool our community, splash pads, we found to be a very popular way that people like to cool off. So we've got 10 splash pads that are built and 9 more that are funded. We started putting shade over playgrounds about 10 years ago, and now have made that a standard that every playground we build, we put shade over that. It's just huge for people to be able to use them, especially in those summer months. And then we actually, I think, are the only department that has developed a standard for shade over playgrounds.
And I am with Tucson Water, which is where our city's green stormwater infrastructure program is housed. Tucson Water serves nearly 800,000 customers and has a really strong history around conservation and conservation ethics. Our conservation program has a dedicated source of funding, and with those funds provides all sorts of rebates for folks to swap out high water use appliances for low water use appliances, install gray water systems and rainwater harvesting systems, both active, collecting rain in cisterns, and passive, collecting rain in basins in landscapes. They also provide K through 12 educational programming for free to any school in the city of Tucson, and also provide landscaping classes that are cutting edge for water conservation and appropriate Sonoran desert landscaping. We're also in the developmental phases of an ornamental turf ban and presently reduction and rebate. So commercial businesses will be offered a rebate to remove their grass, considered ornamental, not functional, and replace it with appropriate snow and desert landscaping. Over the years, all of these conservation methods have had a humongous impact. So the purple, green, and blue lines represent water sources, and the red line represents the population of Tucson, Arizona. And the shocking fact is that today, Tucson Water serves the same volume of water to customers as it did in the 1980s. So we've done an incredible job.
So looking at this from a policy perspective, our mayor and council, they declared an emergency back in 2020. And that really set the stage for the different departments to look into how do we proactively look at developing plans to address climate action and adaptation plans. Looked real heavily into the electric vehicle roadmap, even from the standpoint of mandating that any multifunction housing has to include infrastructure for that. Implementing an urban forestry program and hiring an urban forester with a goal of planting 1 million trees in 10 years, and then really kicking into this green stormwater infrastructure program. So this set the stage for us to start developing a plan that was actually then adopted by Mayor and Council of March of 2023 that we call Tucson Resilient Together.
And all of those programs center equity as one of the frameworks through which to enact all of these climate resiliency actions. And so as Greg was saying, the city chose to launch a green stormwater infrastructure program that was at the bequest of our mayor and council, who are very forward-thinking and proactive around climate mitigation. So they voted unanimously to create a fee that every Tucson water utility customer inside the city of Tucson pays into. That fee is 13 cents per CCF consumed, so that's 748 gallons of water, rather, which averages about 91 cents per household. So it's a pretty nominal fee. It started as a pilot program and we ran for about 1.5 years. And then seeing success and progress, we were made permanent in June of 2023. Something really important to note that will be in contrast to Kate talking about her program in Boston is our city's Storm to Shade program, our GSI program, is non-regulatory driven. We are in it for all of those co-benefits that Gideon was describing in his intro. The city of Tucson does hold an MS4 permit and maintain that, but that is held and maintained through our Department of Transportation and Mobility, so separately from Tucson Water's GSI program. And our program is part of the One Water philosophy. So looking at all of the various water resources we have available to us, whether they're recycled water, surface water, groundwater, but also seeing stormwater as one of those resources to be managed responsibly and for benefit of the community. So the mandates of the Storm to Shade program. Pretty simple. One is to construct green stormwater infrastructure on public property throughout the 6 wards of the city of Tucson. The second, and this one is key, is to maintain everything that we build in addition to legacy GSI that's been built through various city programs over the past couple of decades. And there's a lot of it out there. And then with all of that, again, prioritizing equity. So we use a tool that we'll go into next. Let's go to the next slide, Greg, called Tree Equity Score. And that's fine. And that allows us to see which areas of Tucson are most in need of investment in green infrastructure. This is that map. So the orange and red zones are the highest, or rather the lowest tree equity score zones. And so tree equity was created by an organization called American Forests. It smushes together a couple of demographic indicators like age, race, employment, ethnicity, with climate vulnerabilities like percent tree canopy and surface temperature. And so with that, we overlay upon the city of Tucson, and it's very clear to see which areas are hottest and with the most vulnerable populations that rely on public transportation, walking, biking, to get where they need to go. Those homes that may be having to make the choice between paying an electricity bill and putting food on the table. So we're really interested in investing in those zones. So this map just basically mirrors any other vulnerability or heat map that you would look at for the city of Tucson. You can go back.
I'll go back that one.
Thanks, Greg. So we're in it for the co-benefits, as I mentioned. So for us, green stormwater infrastructure pulls stormwater flows off of impervious surfaces like roads, parking lots, rooftops, and reduces minor flooding in that way. We're pulling water off of hard surfaces and putting it into the landscape to support vegetation that provides shade and cooling for communities. All of those wonderful plants that grow also improve air quality. They act like little evaporative cooling machines. As they photosynthesize, they're transpiring, which means they're releasing moisture, and that cools the environment. It also promotes people getting outside and being active. So there's a public health piece there. And it creates habitat for native critters, which we love. Things like birds, pollinators, little lizards and other reptiles. And so these are all of our drivers. Again, we're non-regulatory driven. We're in it for the co-benefits of GSI.
And Blue, remind me, how much does your fee generate a year?
About $3 million. Thank you. So this is a map. This is just a screen grab from our website that shows where we have centered or where our projects are located. So if you think back to that tree equity score map, you would see most of the middle of this map would be the green zones, and to the west, the east, and the south would be those red and orange zones. So these are the locations where we're centering our projects, and we're really actually being very successful at investing in those places that need more green infrastructure. And so the way that we began looking at identifying projects is there were already some existing improvements happening within the city. One of the big ones was the 407 bond. It's called Tucson Delivers Better Parks and Connections. Connections being things like pedestrian safety projects, greenways, protected bicycle boulevards, those kinds of things. And so we looked at the list of all of those projects, all of which have a certain time frame and budget attached to them, to see, is there opportunity to partner with those existing projects and add green infrastructure to bring additional value to each of those projects and to leverage funds so that we're not mobilizing construction equipment twice. So really dovetailing with both parks, who are doing the transportation connections projects. Parks who are doing the parks projects, and the Department of Transportation that's doing the connections projects. We also work very closely with each of the city's ward offices because those are the folks on the ground close to their communities who really know where investment is needed in their communities. And then again, there's that equity piece where we're constantly looking to invest where it's most needed. We did a quick analysis right off the bat before we started building anything to see how much it would cost to build projects in various locations. And we use this just as an awareness, kind of a rule of thumb. But the big takeaway here, that's great for this conversation with a group of folks who work in parks, is that you can get the biggest bang for your buck on green infrastructure doing projects in parks. On the other end of the spectrum is working in streets, adding things like the chicane that you see there on the left side of the screen. Street work is extremely expensive. Removing pavement is expensive. Removing concrete is expensive. Pouring new concrete curbs and headers is expensive. And so if you really want to stretch your dollars, working in parks is the way to go.
So as Blue said, when we started really delving into the new projects that were approved with our Prop 407 bond, the $225 million, early on, we started kicking off projects in 2018, 2019, and then the GSI fund got approved in 2020. So we quickly looked at every project that we had, that we were touching irrigation, that we were renovating a park, and looked at opportunities. Where can we incorporate this GSI into our process? It is much cheaper to build it initially than it is to try to redesign and retrofit GSI after the fact. So we're trying to figure out how we can incorporate this early into the designs. And one of the things that was really critical in this piece was, since this funding is coming from Tucson Water, where Blue's at, and I'm dealing with park bonds, we had to figure out how we can make sure our staff are working together. So every park project that we have, when we do a plan review meeting, Blue and her staff look at our plans, look for opportunities to incorporate GSI. We have twice a month staff meetings. They attend our staff meetings when we're reviewing projects, so we can make sure they understand, hey, here's what we're working on, and they're looking at where they can plug into our projects. So we work together on our staff meetings. They join them, they review plans to look for these GSI opportunities. One of the things that we certainly looked at extensively is reducing turf and increasing tree canopy. We do this strategically because, as Blue said earlier, there's an incentive to reduce turf throughout the city. So we are looking in parks at where do we reduce non-functional turf. But we don't want to eliminate all turf, because that is where people in Tucson go for grass. Nobody in Tucson has grass in their yard. It's all desert landscaping. So if you want to experience grass, they're going to parks for that feature. So we don't want to eliminate turf, but we want to reduce what's not really critical turf areas. And when we reduce that turf, we want to increase tree canopy, because one of the biggest things we hear in community engagement is more trees, more shade. So we kind of negotiate that. All right, give up a little bit of turf, but we're going to put more trees in, more shade. One of our goals is clearly to reduce water use. We live in a desert. We want to maximize water, use it most efficiently as possible. And then long-term, we're looking at policies for, how much turf should be in a park, how much should we reduce going forward. So we kind of develop a standard that we're implementing across the city. The first successful project that we worked on together was called CSM Gunny Barreras Park. This is here in Tucson. And if you look at, this is actually a school park partnership. There's a middle school here on the top side and a high school on the south side. All of this tan space on this map used to be grass. I mean, this was literally a wall-to-wall grass park. So as we renovate it going forward, we eliminate a lot of turf to really only functional areas. And then the 3 green stormwater infrastructure projects, the first one was over here along Campbell Avenue, where we're pulling water off the street to create this GSI basin. And then that was actually the initial impetus. We ended up adding 2 more, which is taking water off of parking lots to create a couple more GSI basins. But this was a project that Park and Rec was spending about $5 million. And Blue, what did you guys spend? 250?
We spent about 400 in the end, I think.
400.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because this was our first project, we learned a lot from this one.
We did. But what we also learned is this is a great way to get, more trees, more plant materials in the parks, and they had a funding source that wasn't coming out of those park funds. So the community was really benefiting. Blue, anything you want to add to this slide?
Just to say that as Greg mentioned, the primary source of water for this park project is a large road that just happens to be a lot higher. Perfect. So that road is the horizontal lines across the top of this graphic. Stormwater flows from Campbell Avenue through a couple of sidewalk scuppers that did not previously exist. We installed them. So flows into these basins, which are technically a bioswale. The flow is designed to start at the right-hand end of the graphic and flow to the left, as Greg's showing with his mouse. And then finally, if those overtop, then they overflow into an existing riparian wash area. And so that's the mechanics of the situation.
The next project we wanted to highlight was at Cherry Avenue Park. This is a kind of a 6-acre, not a real big park, but we were spending some bond dollars to put a dog park down here in the bottom left. But we still had all this other open space. And this was cool because Pima County Regional Flood Control District, a county agency, came to us and said, hey, we would love to pull water off the street here and create this GSI basin, which you see in the middle picture here. This was probably within 6 months of this project being completed. One of Blue staff actually went by and saw the water in there. And then the picture on the right is what it looks like today. And this project's been done now for about 2 years. So you can see quite a bit of, well, for us, this is quite a bit of green.
And this is a really cool partnership that we'll talk about a little bit more in the rest of the presentation. But this opportunity that our regional flood control district brings to cover project expenses up front to meet their goal of mitigating flooding in neighborhoods. So the neighborhood surrounding this area is a lot of manufactured and trailer homes and floods really badly when there are large rain events. And so this project helped them to pull some of that, a good chunk of that stormwater flooding off of that neighborhood.
And then our most recent success story is Park at Iron Horse Park. And you kind of see on the left what it looked like previously, some trees along a roadway here, decomposed granite. And then Blue and her team came in and put in a scupper here to get the water off the street, create this green infrastructure, and this kind of flows down along to a couple more basins down the way. So came out really, really good. I'd say the one thing we learned about on this project was, we try not to spend money on irrigation, but sometimes we have to spend a little bit just to get the plants established with the goal of then eventually shutting the irrigation off. And so that was one of the things we struggled with on this project was, all right, we hate to spend $70,000 on irrigation, but we need to get the plant started and knowing that eventually we'll shut the water off and not have to use it.
And in the end, our contractor was willing to make us a real minimal, simple little irrigation system that didn't cost more than a leg.
And then this is actually a future project. We did a new master plan for this, what we call Reed Park. And it's kind of hard to see on this map here, but there's actually a wash that kind of runs through the park. A wash for us is where the water runs when it rains. And then our long-term goal is to take this wash and actually reroute it, meander it through the park so we can use it to water more trees when it rains, but also make it a play feature so that when it's not wet with water in it, it's got rocks in there and kids can play in it. And I think Chris mentioned earlier being in Tucson back in November and seeing some potential future places. We've got huge parking lots around this baseball field that we're looking at future green stormwater infrastructure projects in this space.
Indeed. So all those lessons learned. As Greg mentioned, we figured out pretty quick that getting involved as early as possible saves a lot of heartache and going back and redesigning and redesigning and redesigning. So the way that we worked at Gunny, our very first project was to integrate completely hand in glove with the existing plans. So the GSI plans just became another set of pages within the entire park plan. We would use the same landscape architect and the same construction contractor. So super, super helpful. We also learned that, as probably everybody knows at this point, everything's just a heck of a lot more expensive than it was 5 years ago. And so when our budget was created in 2020, before COVID, we thought we would have a lot more funding that would make a lot bigger impact. But it is what it is, and we're plowing ahead. And that those costs vary greatly by project type. So as I mentioned earlier, projects in the street can be as much as 5 times more expensive than projects in parks or on open parcels of land. I want to say here that that doesn't mean that we're not doing projects in streets, because streets are used by everyone. So there's a really massive impact that happens when we add vegetation and shade on streets, and that impact can affect a whole lot of people. So we are still doing those projects even though they are costly. Working with contractors has been a learning curve for sure as well. Again, kind of going hand in hand with inflation and increased costs, our project timelines. Most of our construction contractors are booked out months and months. And so getting projects designed in the pipeline and then built is taking a lot longer than initially anticipated. Also, the experience and expertise of those contractors varies greatly. So we have quite a good crew of designers in Tucson, landscape architects who understand green stormwater infrastructure. GSI has been happening in Tucson for decades. It was called rainwater harvesting, passive rainwater harvesting, and now we call it GSI. But there are a lot of folks who've come up in that field and in a sort of more grassroots journey of creating GSI. But when it comes to the construction contractors, that's a different ballgame. And those folks are typically a lot more used to building traditional gray infrastructure. So a lot of hand-holding, a lot of showing up to weekly construction progress meetings, a lot of really getting down into the nitty-gritty as far as what's drawn in the plans and helping folks figure out what that means when it gets put in the ground. A lot of time and investment there. Also plant palettes. So the Sonoran Desert is the most biodiverse desert in the entire world. We have just an absolutely incredible, beautiful diversity of plants, many of which are edible or have medicinal properties. But Tucson is a place where folks mostly have moved here from other places and brought their own tastes and preferences and landscapes with them. And so going back to that native Sonoran Desert plant palette, those plants that have evolved here over millions of years, has been a bit of a push, and it continues to be. It's really difficult to source plants. There are only a couple of folks who actually even grow plants from native seed here. And so there's a big education piece that's happening around bringing back our native Sonoran Desert plant palette. And then, as Greg mentioned earlier, irrigation versus hand watering. The goal of our green infrastructure program is to be able to support our landscapes on stormwater alone. But to get those plants established, they need consistent watering for as many as 2 years. And then if we have a drought that comes along, like we did in the summer of 2020, and it's 116 degrees for weeks on end, having an irrigation system in place, even if it's been turned off most of the time, is really helpful. So we're really, as I mentioned, trying to work with contractors to build irrigation systems that are very simple, pretty low tech, can be easily turned on and off, so that we're not spending a whole bunch of money on them and can still use them when we need them. Did you want to add anything else, Greg, to that?
Nope.
Okay. All right, now we're going to dive into maintenance, because this is a huge piece of the puzzle that often goes unrecognized or at least neglected. Poor maintenance. Everybody loves a shiny, pretty new project, but the long-term O&M is a different story, and often there aren't even budgets for it. So when Storm to Shade was imagined, its architects recognized the importance of funding for maintenance. So our maintenance budget is $350,000 a year, and we use that to hire contractors outside of the city, independent contractors, to perform the maintenance work on everything that we build and all of those legacy features that we've identified. Before we came along, there was all this GSI out scattered throughout the city in parks, most of it in streets, some in little neighborhood pocket parks, but there was no proactive program. Maintenance was all reactive, i.e. a constituent picks up the phone and calls somebody at the city and complains that a tree has fallen down or a car has run into a piece of GSI, and then the city has to respond. Another big challenge initially was that these assets were located in different city departments. So anything in a street belongs to DTM, anything in a park belongs to parks, anything on a Tucson Water well site belongs to Tucson Water. And each of these departments works very much in a silo, and they do not use a common asset management system. So this was a big, there was a lot of missed communication or just no communication venues in order to address these challenges. Competing interests. So where we can build GSI throughout the city is where there is vacant land that is not where something else isn't needed. So in the example of Tucson Water well sites, for instance, there are hundreds of these throughout the city. Often they're just a dirt lot with a small corner of that dirt lot fenced or walled off where the well site equipment is. Well, like most of you, we're in a city that has a PFAS contamination problem. And so though there might be all this amazing land ripe for the development of GSI, Tucson Water may have designs on in the future building a PFAS treatment facility there. And so there's a lot of negotiation around what the highest and best use of vacant land in the city is. Also, unsheltered populations. We do a lot of community outreach, and I would say the number one piece of pushback that we get is if we build green stormwater infrastructure, if we create a shady, cool, beautiful natural environment, it will attract people who are unsheltered to come and camp and live there. And so that's something that is an evolving conversation. There are lots of city programs and lots of city funding tackling this problem, trying to get folks housed. But it's just something that comes up often, and we work with neighborhoods and communicating on it. I will say that we have taken a stand, a position rather, to say we will not build a project because of concerns about unsheltered populations. We will build a project. And then finally, our internal city maintenance staff, whether that's parks groundskeepers or transportation's streets maintenance workers, didn't have a lot of education around the proper best practices for the maintenance of GSI. And so there's been a lot of a learning happening around here. I think I go into that on the next slide. So we had a lot of work to do. And so the first thing that we did was to develop a GSI maintenance protocol, which we got adopted by all the departments in the entire city of Tucson. This is to bring everybody onto the same page about how we do the work that we're doing and why we do it this way. With the bottom line being, the way that we maintain GSI landscapes is for health of the landscape to be able to provide maximum benefits to the community, only barring health of humans and safety. So human safety first, but after that, it's all about the health of the landscape so that it can be the best that it can be and provide all of those wonderful co-benefits. And then we went about training folks. So we started with our internal city crews, parks maintenance folks, streets maintenance folks, and we created 4 modules of training based on that maintenance protocol. We still require that every person who touches landscape in the city go through that maintenance program. So we have an ongoing schedule of trainings. We developed this maintenance manual. That little photo is the cover of it. It's a pocket manual. It is waterproof. We want it in every city truck and every county truck and basically any work truck that does any landscape maintenance throughout the city. It's in there. It's about 16 pages long, very simple to use, very high level, but it gives you all those basic principles of performing maintenance for the health of the landscape. We also set about penning MOUs with other city departments that very clearly outline where Greg's department's responsibility begins and ends for GSI, and our responsibility begins and ends for GSI, so that it's very clear. Nobody's wondering who's on first. And we have created an asset management system which we integrated with Tucson Waters. This is our asset inventory. Just to give you a snapshot, there are about 750 assets throughout Tucson, whole bunch. Most are in streets. And then this is just to wrap it all up and put a bow on it. It's all about partnerships and collaboration and communication. So my program, Storm to Shade, working with parks, transportation, Tucson Water, planning and development services, which does permitting, and housing and community development, which is building new housing. I'm getting the impression
Yeah.
our time is done.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Greg and Blue. Tons of questions coming in as well. And if there's any specific ones you guys have a chance to answer, you can try to type those in and broadcast them to all. For folks who've been to Tucson, it is a really special place that understands its unique relationship with nature. And I think because there's so many questions and there's been so much to say, we'll try to push the webinar a few minutes, getting, beyond the 3/4 of an hour and get a little bit closer to the 3 o'clock Eastern time to give us a little bit of extra time for folks who can stick around. But next, I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about her incredible green infrastructure work in Boston and the unique role that she has in public leadership there. So Kate, the screen is yours.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. And I just want to introduce myself again. My name is Kate England. I'm the director of the Office of Green Infrastructure for the City of Boston. And I've got a couple things that we're going to go through today. I'm going to start with a little introduction to my role and how it's kind of unique among the kind of the green infrastructure field in the city or in the country. So my role is it's a cabinet level position. So my position exists within this kind of upper echelon of our city government that is not specifically in a department. So typically, and as you just heard from Blue and Greg, a green infrastructure program manager or director, that role is going to exist within your water department, sometimes within a parks department. It is unusual for this role to not exist within one of your standard city departments, but the intent of the creation of this position was to really encourage working across city departments. So my role and now my office kind of exist in this this non-department space so that I can really spend time sharing my work and my expertise and my energy across multiple different departments. It's an appointed position. The current mayor of Boston, Mayor Michelle Wu, appointed me in 2022. So I've only been here for a couple of years, but I had done a lot of work in the city of Boston before that. And I actually previously worked for our Boston Water and Sewer Commission. And then I've also worked for the state of Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, so the State Parks Department. So I've done a nice little tour of all of our kind of key stakeholders in green infrastructure in Boston. So these are the three things I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about today. I'm going to give a brief example of some of the policy work that my office has done, which is one of our kind of primary functions. I'm going to talk a little bit about green infrastructure maintenance in the city of Boston. That is a topic that I get asked about in every presentation that I give, and it's definitely something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about and working on in Boston. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our work supporting other departments, because again, the benefit of your position not existing within a single department is that you kind of get to be part of everybody's departments. All right, so I want to start with something that we call the GI right-of-way policy. One of the first things that I did when I first started this role was to look at the current stormwater situation in the city of Boston. And as is true with many of your cities, a lot of stormwater was being generated and needed to be managed in the right-of-way. Additionally, a lot of the stormwater in the city that comes from houses and buildings and kind of parcelized properties drains to the right-of-way. And so really wanted to focus our efforts on policy that would affect a large amount of stormwater in the city. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is an intersection in the city of Boston. For those of you who have driven in Boston, we have got some very special roadway systems here. They are not always straight or linear. They are often very confusing, especially if you're not familiar with our city. But this example, what you are seeing in that kind of reddish area is an intersection that has been teed off, which means that for safety reasons that we took this kind of large intersection that existed and we created a T, which is a safer, more like navigable intersection for the average user, including people in vehicles, people on bikes, and people on foot or using mobility devices. And so what we ended up creating here, and this is before I started with the city of Boston, was this large 3,000 square foot island, which is concrete and stamped brick. So there's asphalt in there that is stamped to look like brick. So very large area that is not currently serving any real function. And although the intersection is safer, this kind of space that was created was not being used to its highest and best use. So to stop that from happening, we had a couple of projects that we're going through, and this is just an example. You can see an existing intersection here. This is New England Avenue in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. You can see how big the intersection is if you look at the size of the cars in the image. So as you can see, this intersection is actually quite large. A neighborhood safety project, technically a Vision Zero project, was done here that included striping and flex posts, which you're seeing in the aerial image. So you can see that there were a lot of areas that were created that were no longer part of the right of way, at least not accessible to vehicles. And so years ago, when I was at Boston Water and Sewer, I approached our Boston Transportation Department and asked if I could take those hatched areas and transform them into green infrastructure. And so this is what it looks like today. So as you can see on the left side of the screen, there's a large bioretention area. And then around the corners of the intersection, there are rain gardens. And then there's a tree infiltration trench that runs the stretch of the several blocks of New England Avenue. So the goal was to create a situation in Boston where that last image was the norm, not that first image where you saw with all of the paving in that kind of new space that was created by a teed-off intersection. So we put in place a policy in October of 2022, so just a few months after I started my job. And what we did is we required that projects in the right-of-way that altered the curb line. So if you're moving curb for any reason, that could be a safety improvement, a Vision Zero project, roadway reconstruction, whatever it is, you are now required to implement one of these 5 types of green infrastructure rather than just paving those newly created bump outs. In addition to the actual design requirement of adding green infrastructure to these projects, we also included 2 operational components. So the first was that we committed to always have 2 maintenance contracts available, one for vegetation maintenance and one for porous paving maintenance. And we committed to starting a citywide green infrastructure volunteer program, which we piloted in 2023 and launched citywide in April earlier this year. And I'll talk about the GI volunteer program in a minute. So this is just an example of a project that went through design that was captured under this policy. So this is Cummins Highway in the Mattapan neighborhood of Boston. And you'll see the color coding on the screen shows different parts of the plan that are now green infrastructure. So that kind of lime green is a porous asphalt cycle track that exists on both sides of the roadway. It's elevated and separated from traffic, which means it's not at the road level, it's up at the sidewalk level. You can also see that kind of like bluish color, there are some bioretention areas, which means rain gardens and other planted features. And then we also have some nice little recessed planters, which are areas that are a bit small to like manage a meaningful amount of water or stormwater, but we still wanted water to be able to flow into them and absorb into the ground. We also created a series of supporting resources. So we, working with the city's Green Infrastructure Working Group, which I will describe in just a minute, we created details and specifications. You can see there's a list of collaborators at the bottom of the slide here. We really intentionally wanted to make sure that we had engaged Public Works, Boston Transportation, our Disabilities Commission, our Parks Department, public schools, Boston Water and Sewer, and actually some additional folks who are not listed here, so that we could get a good understanding of what these details and specifications needed to include so that this kind of green infrastructure would work for everybody. We also created guidelines, meaning just a simple guide to how you should design green infrastructure in these various kind of roadway areas, as well as a plant palette that has been tested over several years and kind of pared down as we've removed plants that maybe don't perform as well. And then we are also working currently on expanding this right-of-way policy. So currently the policy is only triggered if you're changing curb lines, but now the project or the new policy captures both public and private projects. So not just city projects, but all projects in the right-of-way. It captures projects that are going to go through our Public Improvement Commission, which is our city permitting body for the right-of-way. And it also is triggered if you're replacing 250 feet or more linear feet of sidewalk. And so we are also working on getting in there projects that are proposing pavement restoration for streets cabinet owned parking lots and maintenance yards. So things that these are parcels that are specifically owned by Public Works and Boston Transportation's departments. And the policy's kind of been renamed. It's now the streets policy as opposed to just the right-of-way policy. We are now allowing all green infrastructure that's contained in the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook. So all stormwater control measures that are listed and tested and have design curves and pollutant removal curves, as well as we are adding stronger requirements for brand new right-of-ways, which doesn't happen very often, but we do have some examples in the city of Boston where a brand new road is being created. And for those projects, we are aiming for a 100-year, 24-hour storm event for our design storm. So a significant amount of stormwater storage in these projects because they're blank slates and we have no existing utilities underground that we have to navigate. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about green infrastructure maintenance. So again, topic that I think most of us are most interested in because it is almost always the reason that we hear no when we propose green infrastructure is, yeah, that would be nice, but we're not sure how to maintain it and we're not set up for that. We don't have the funding and we don't have the training. So spend a little bit of time thinking about how do we remove maintenance as a barrier. And so what we came up with was provide maintenance contracts. So I mentioned that we were going to always have those two maintenance contracts, one for landscape maintenance and one for porous paving. The second thing that we're doing is rather than just maintaining green infrastructure from one department with these contracts, we're actually maintaining green infrastructure across all of our city departments with these contracts. So we have a single contract that manages green infrastructure, regardless of who is the owner or the user agency for the green infrastructure. We're also taking this kind of multi-pronged maintenance approach, which I have seen a lot of really amazing programs in this country do green infrastructure really well and really struggle with maintenance. And so I really wanted to make sure that we had a couple of redundancies in place so that the green infrastructure that we were designing and building would stay healthy and functional and look nice and would, mature and grow the way that we'd like all of our green infrastructure to grow over time. So the multi-pronged approach is we use maintenance contracts, Thursdays with Power Corps, which I'll talk about in just a second, and our green infrastructure volunteer program. So our contracts, we are using something that I affectionately call creative contracting. Municipal entities, I assume everybody or most of the people on this call are familiar with public procurement, but municipal entities are beholden to a low bid contracting system, which means that when we try to build or maintain, anything, so it could be street sweeping, could be green infrastructure maintenance, we typically have to do a low bid contract, which means that the contractor who bids the least amount of money is the one who is awarded the contract. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't always result in the best or most knowledgeable contractor, especially with a specialized type of maintenance like green infrastructure maintenance. So rather than using low bid standard contracting, we are now using an RFP or a request for proposal process. And what this allows us to do is select our contractor based on the proposal rather than the dollar amount that they bid. It is also allowing us to use the city's certified businesses list, which is businesses that are women-owned or minority-owned businesses that are have basically gone through a vendor verification process with the city, and they're now on this certified businesses list. We can do a 3-quote system where we put out a quote to 3 qualified vendors from the city's certified businesses list, and we can award a contract up to $250,000. So getting the work into the hands of local contractors, small businesses, people who live here and who experience the benefits of this green infrastructure, as opposed to awarding to a low bidder, which frequently comes in from the outside of the city, which is why their overhead costs are lower. They are usually entities that can afford to underbid because they have large, companies with lots and lots of crews, which really made it difficult for us to get these contracts into the smaller business hands. And now we have been able to do that. So happy to talk more about that or answer questions offline. We also do something called Thursdays with Power Corps. And so our Thursdays with Power Corps events are, our Power Corps program is a City of Boston Earn and Learn program. The program takes young people 18 to 30 years old in the City of Boston and teaches them skills in the kind of green industry so that they can get or enter into careers in the green fields. So for example, we have one of our tracks is an arboriculture training where these young people are getting training to be arborists. We have another track, which is our green infrastructure track, where the young people are spending their time learning about green infrastructure, climate resilience, and then again, getting to work in the field with us. So every Thursday, we have one of our Power Corps crews out in the field with us. During most of the year, we're doing standard maintenance work. So removing sediment and weeding and pruning and, doing kind of your kind of regular tasks to keep your features functioning. And then during the spring and fall, we do a good amount of planting. So these young people get to help with plant selection and layout, and then they get to help do the planting. So the goal here is to give these young people, the experience that they need to get careers in this field, but also to take advantage of the fact that this is a wonderful workforce development program, and we have lots of hands and people who want to be part of maintaining green infrastructure. So just another image. And I should have mentioned earlier, all the images in the presentation are green infrastructure features in the city of Boston. And you'll notice at the bottom, there's a little tag that says the name of the location. So this is Harambee Park, which is a large park in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. And then the agency, the entity that owns it. So this one is a parks project, and then the neighborhood in the city that they're located in. And then the last of our kind of multi-pronged maintenance approach is our green infrastructure volunteer program. So this program took a lot of time to get up and running. As you can imagine, it took some conversations with our legal department to get in place a waiver that legal was comfortable with and that, protected our participants and the green infrastructure that they were working on. The program is open to anyone who lives, works, and plays in the city of Boston. Individuals are able to adopt a green infrastructure feature in the city. They receive training from us, which is a requirement of our legal department. They had to go through an actual training program, both virtual and on site. They receive supplies and safety PPE from us. So you can see in the image here that the young people are wearing a branded City of Boston vest that has, City of Boston Green Infrastructure Program on it. They also receive gloves, rubber palm gloves, 5-gallon bucket, litter pickers, trash bags, and leaf bags. And they are able to go out and perform maintenance on green infrastructure in the city on their own time. So the reason that we really wanted to get this program up and running was that we had a lot of individuals who wanted to be part of green infrastructure maintenance, but couldn't attend the events that we were holding because they were at times that just didn't work for people. So, some people were able to attend weekend events. Some people were able to attend weeknight events, but most people were finding that they just weren't available when we were hosting these events. So the training program and the waiver and all the supplies allow our volunteers to go out on their own time and do the maintenance when it works for them. We've had really great success. The program's been up and running since April, and we're really excited about how things are going. And then the last thing I want to talk a little bit about was how we are supporting all of our departments. So I mentioned briefly in passing that we have something called the Green Infrastructure Working Group at the City of Boston. So this group is a cross-departmental working group where we bring together individuals from departments all over the city to talk about green infrastructure, to help progress some of our work that we're doing, to get feedback from people about what's going well and what's not. So currently we have the large group meets every other month. We have 60-ish members in it, and there are over 20 departments that are currently represented. And then within the working group, we also have smaller subgroups. So we have 3 subgroups. Our coordination and maintenance group, which talks about, how to better coordinate our work across departments. As we just heard from Baloo and Greg, that there's so many benefits to coordinating our projects across departments, including major cost savings. The second group is our details and specifications group. And so the details and specifications group were instrumental in creating those details and specifications and guides that we mentioned earlier with the right-of-way policy. And then we also have our policy group, who were huge in creating the revised version of the right-of-way policy that will go into effect by the end of this calendar year. So actually in the next 2 weeks, which is really wonderful. So we also make capital requests for other departments. So my office, as I mentioned, is not technically in any of the existing city departments. And so I have been fortunate enough and able to make requests to add funding for green infrastructure to other departments' projects. So for example, the Cummins Highway project that I showed earlier in the presentation is a multi-mile roadway reconstruction. And the addition of all of this green infrastructure was not in the original scope. So the project started design long before I started started my role with the city. And so all of those new scope items, and this probably wouldn't have been the case had green infrastructure been part of the original scope, but all of those new items did add cost to the estimate for the project. And so we were able to put in a funding request and get an additional $5 million for the construction for the project. And we've done it for other departments as well. People are very appreciative, and it has resulted in a lot of really wonderful, willing partnerships that, you know, we'd like to, you know, think that all of the work that we are doing, that everybody will just be friends all the time. But I think a lot of what has to happen there is there has to be trust built, and there has to be reciprocal work being done. So us offering to help fund things and help design things has really helped our city departments be really willing to add green infrastructure to their projects moving forward. And then the last thing is we love to build green infrastructure with our sister departments. So I have a couple of quick examples, because who doesn't love pictures of adorable children planting plants? So this is an image of the East Boston Early Education Center. This is a Boston public school located in East Boston. We were asked to come see this location by the staff at the school. They reached out to our office and said, we've got this sidewalk to nowhere and this kind of large ponded place that every time it rains, we end up with flooding. Can we do something with this? And so our office designed this beautiful rain garden. And as you saw in that first image, we were able to have the children at the school who are K0 to first grade, so they're 4 to 6-year-olds, were able to help us do plant selection, as well as physically plant the plants with us on the day that we built the rain garden. So it was a really wonderful project. And then we also have a last example. We have our Boston Housing Authority is one of the, I think it actually is the largest landowner in the city of Boston, which means they've got a lot of space on their, in their housing developments that could potentially be used for green infrastructure. Knowing that this was the case, early on in my tenure with the city, I reached out to the Boston Housing Authority and asked if I could do anything to support their work. So rather than making an ask of them, I offered my assistance. And so what ended up happening was I spent a good amount of time with Boston Housing Authority. I helped them with their sustainability goals and guidelines. I did a couple of site visits to help them address some of the flooding issues that they were having on their properties, talked to them about food propagation, how could they build some raised beds to grow food for their residents. And what ended up happening was the city of Boston hosts something called Success Link, which is a youth employment program that happens over the summer. And Success Link partners with organizations, departments, and entities all over the city to provide jobs for young people during the summer months. So we were able to participate with Boston Housing Authority and Success Link. We created a summer program for young people living at Franklin Field, which is one of the housing developments in Dorchester. So we did curriculum with them. And by curriculum, I mean like activities, like hands-on activities. So we did 6 weeks of field trips and drawing and creating watersheds and like explaining how climate change was happening and like how watersheds worked. And then the young people designed a rain garden, including plant selection, plant layout. You know, they selected the space on their site that they wanted to put it in. And we were able to build this with these wonderful young people. And the most amazing thing happened while we were planting with the teens, because the program was run with out of the teen center at Franklin Field. We also had children, like young children who, you know, like ran out of their homes and asked if they could help us plant. So it really became more of a community installation by the end of the day. And it was just like a really enjoyable, you know, fun day where a bunch of teenagers were like, hey, everything's awesome. And let me teach my 4-year-old, you know, little brother how to plant a plant. So it was a really wonderful experience. All right, so wrapping up there, because I know we have lots of wonderful questions we want to get to. The QR code on the screen is for the city's social media accounts. If you want to take a look at some of our pictures, we're very prolific with our pictures of our fun stuff that we do. Thanks for the time. And Gideon, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Kate. I think, you know, your work is such a poignant example of the importance of public leadership in all of this, which is a point that our partners at the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange have repeatedly stressed in their work, the difference that public leadership can make in pushing this collaboration. Because we have so many questions and our speakers each went a little bit over because they had so much good stuff to share, we will push the webinar past the quarter hour. We originally were going to end at 2:45 Eastern, but we're happy to go an extra 10 minutes or so to try to get to that. If people do need to leave early, though, please make sure you fill out the evaluation that will pop up when you exit out of Zoom. So I think with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Rachel, who'll start posing some of the great questions you guys have been posting up there.
Thanks, Gideon. Thanks so much to our wonderful speakers. And thank you all for being here today and for asking such thoughtful questions. I know there's a lot going on in the Q&A box. Rest assured, we will be sharing all of the resources and links as well as the recording from today's session. But we're fortunate to have a little bit more time with Blue and Kate and Greg here to ask some of these questions live. So one of the questions that is coming up most often in our Q&A box, but also in pretty much every conversation we have about these topics, is cost. We are in a challenging time financially for many, many jurisdictions, and gray infrastructure is much more traditional, normal for people, more comfortable. We always do what we've always done kind of a mindset. So I'm curious if you can speak to how people can respond to cost concerns about, differences between gray and green infrastructure, and then also how you can use that conversation to be a launching pad for making the case for green infrastructure. So I'll open it up to any of you. I'm sure each of you has answers you could share. We'll try and keep it brief so we can keep moving through the questions, but what comes up for you?
I'll throw two things out there real quick. Clearly designing it up front when we're building new projects is something that we with Parks and Recreation now just do as part of our design process. If we've got existing parks that we want to put GSI in, then typically I'm going to Blue because I don't have funds to design something that's already built. So if we're trying to retrofit something, Tucson Water's covering that. Initially, if we're building it, then Parks are going to cover it. I also think long-term GSI basins, you have maintenance costs for any space in the park. And I think long-term, you're going to use less water. For us, we're going to use less water in this GSI basin. So that's a cost savings long-term. And there's less of our staff time to maintain these basins versus maintaining turf. So I think there's cost benefits we haven't necessarily, specifically gone into yet, but I know long-term there's a savings for us that this GSI basin is going to help us.
Yeah, and dovetailing on that, the GSI appreciates over time, whereas gray infrastructure depreciates over time. The minute you build something out of concrete, it is losing value every moment thereon. Whereas natural infrastructure only gains value as it ages. And to speak to the maintenance piece, when maintenance is done properly in GSI, it's typically just removing trash, clearing out sediment traps, maybe some minor pruning here and there to make sure that branches aren't getting, in people's faces or whapping cars as they drive by. But it's really minimal, at least the kind here. I know that green infrastructure in other areas of the country looks very different and can be a lot more complex and intensive, and maybe Kate can speak to that part.
Yeah, happy to do that. And I will say that we, as somebody who worked at Boston Water and Sewer before, and then now, has this other role that's much more focused on like co-benefit heavy green infrastructure, that surface vegetated GI. We do find that the complexities of building gray infrastructure, especially in a city like Boston that is very space constrained and already incredibly built out, and that includes underground, it's very difficult and expensive for us to build and upsize gray infrastructure, whereas green infrastructure tends to be a little bit easier. It's also, again, natural materials, which cost less and start to self-perpetuate. So we're using our existing green infrastructure to like almost as a nursery, because as our plant material establishes and multiplies, which is what the natural systems do, we have to split and separate. And so we are able to take plant material from one location and spread it to our other locations, which has been really awesome. So to Blue's point, green infrastructure in the city of Boston grows like crazy because we get a lot of rain here. And so a lot of what we are doing at this stage, it's only been, 2 or 3 years at this point, but what we're doing at this stage is splitting and spreading. And so that's a new maintenance thing that actually saves us money because now we don't have to buy new plant material.
I love that. So it's a regenerative design approach too. Go ahead, Liz.
And I just want to say one final thing, just to make sure that we're all very aware. Green infrastructure, again, whether it be for water quality or other reasons, it provides so many other benefits. Whereas, a piece of gray infrastructure does one thing, it has one purpose. Green infrastructure serves a multitude of purposes. And I know that there are a lot, I don't know about a lot, but there are tools being developed presently by the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange and others that are really diving into quantifying those co-benefits of green infrastructure. And I saw a lot of questions in the Q&A that were asking about those tools. We have not used them yet, so I don't have any experience with them. Kate, have you?
We've used some of them. We also help make some of them. So I would recommend using them. But yeah, there's the library that the exchange is building is becoming a really nice compendium of all this. And then the cost metrics that the city of Boston is starting to put together, tracking our own costs for green infrastructure versus gray and other things. There are other cities that are contributing and doing similar work as well. So there's some good cost comparison data that's becoming more available, which was not available before. And Rachel, really quickly before we jump off, there were two quick questions I wanted to address in the chat. The maintenance contracts that I mentioned, the Office of Green Infrastructure owns them and solicited them. So we do have a budget for our office that is, again, not the public works budget. It's not the transportation budget. It's not the parks budget. It's our own standalone budget. And we do use that funding across departments. And the money comes from the operating budget. There was another question in there about operating versus capital funding. And operating funds do tend to be a bit more difficult to get. It does seem like capital funding is easier to come by, but we have started the conversation in Boston, and I think that we're starting to see really good progress on this, that you cannot invest in new capital and not have like an adjustment to your operating budget, because otherwise you're just investing and then your investment is essentially being wasted or destroyed. And so we have started to see a little bit more proactivity on the operations funding for maintenance front, but we had to make a case for it. We had to show them what happens when you don't maintain. And so happy to share some resources that we used, but a lot of it was just pictures and videos, which were really compelling because most budget folks don't know what green infrastructure is. And so saying to them, I need funding to maintain plants, they're like, oh, just go to Home Depot and pick up some more. Like it's the understanding of what's required is not there until you really show them what it looks like and show them what maintenance looks like. So I highly recommend the use of videos and images.
It's great. Thank you. And we'll be sure to share those resources and also the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange benefit calculator tool that folks mentioned. Kate, you talked about how in a perfect world, parks and stormwater management would just work together beautifully and everyone would see that we have common cause and all that. That's certainly what we're going towards. And the reality is in many cities, there are competing priorities in terms of how parkland is used, whether it's for active recreation, passive recreation, sensitive habitat, natural areas, green stormwater infrastructure. Can you talk about sort of how you navigate this competition for park space generally? And then also if you have any advice for people who may be early on in this negotiation process with their park agency counterparts or their engineering agency counterparts, what you might recommend.
Yeah, I love this question. Thanks, Rachel. So years ago, when I was at Boston Water and Sewer, and trying to find ways and areas that could really accommodate large volumes of stormwater, parks were an obvious, opportunity, if you will. And so those initial conversations years ago, and again, this is at the beginning of this work, right? So everybody I'm sure has had this conversation. The initial conversation that we had with parks was, oh, we don't really know how we'd maintain that. We don't really have space for that. And so the initial kind of ask was rebuffed a bit. And so it took time and kind of demonstrating that, okay, you have goals to create truly ecological significant natural spaces in your parks. How about a constructed wetland, which is an ecologically significant natural space that also manages stormwater? And by putting water into this space will ensure that the plants in here are getting the access to water that they need to survive. So that was like an early inroad. Harambee Park, where during the Power Core part of my presentation, the constructed wetland in Harambee Park was like the first really big green infrastructure feature in a park that we were able to get approved. So after that was done, you know, we kind of had opened the door with our parks folks and had kind of asked them, would you be willing to consider those spaces in between paths, for example, where currently you're just mowing and it's added maintenance and the space isn't really serving a function? Could we turn those into rain gardens or like meadows? And so Park said, sure, let's try one. And so over in Brighton, we were able to get a small rain garden that was in a triangle of paths. And now it's this beautiful wildflower rich, you know, space where there are pollinators and little kids hopping on boulders that we put in there. So it became this kind of passive recreation space while also providing biodiversity and habitat and like managing stormwater, which we also needed. So we've kind of iterated with parks, trying to find ways to meet their needs, knowing that Parks has its own set of goals that is like similar to the work that we're doing, but maybe not perfectly aligned. And so it's really speaking the language of the person that you're talking to that has been the most helpful for me. And really understanding, okay, maintenance is the barrier for parks. They are underfunded, they are understaffed. And so by offering to take on that maintenance and to add all of their sites to the Green Infrastructure Volunteer Program, we got a lot more yeses from them because it ceased to become a burden and became okay, great, less mowing that has to happen in this area. Blue, you said it perfectly. Remove the turf, don't do the mowing, like put in something that's an actual valuable, you know, landscape. So I think that's kind of how we approached it. Make a friend, talk the language of the person that you're talking to, make offers instead of asks at first, and then over time, hopefully it will just become normal. At least that's what we're starting to see here.
That's great. I'm also hearing the value of pilot projects. I mean, Storm to Shade started off as a pilot. Kate, you just spoke to a small, you know, a pilot plot. I think starting small and then showing proof of concept, building those relationships, making the case, having beautiful pictures to show people really does go a long way. We have time for a couple more. Oh, go ahead, Greg. If there's something you want
Rachel,
to.
I just got one more thing from the park perspective, as far as,
Please.
you know, helping the community understand the value of using these open spaces, and even if they are active spaces, for flood detention, which then create or prevents flooding downtown. Like we've got a golf course that serves as a major flood detention project that completely eliminated flooding in neighborhoods in our downtown. So to allow a golf course to take on that water just provides more value to the golf space to reduce flooding downtown. So that was a huge win for our community. And the reality is, within 24 hours, it's usable. So yeah, we can have 6, 8 feet of water in there, but 24 hours later, golfers are out there playing on it. It's not a big deal. I've seen soccer fields used for this. I know Phoenix has a lot of neighborhood parks. They have just big grassy areas that serve as, you know, flood areas. So there's value to the community beyond just the use as a park, but also for other benefits to the community that I think once people learn that, it starts to become a no-brainer.
That's great. We still have a ton of questions. We don't have a ton of time. So I'm actually just going to ask one last question. I hope each of you can answer. And I know the City Parks Alliance team is typing as quickly as they can to try and answer Q&A box questions, but someone also suggested maybe posting Q&A. So I think we'd be happy to do that. And this is just the beginning of a conversation, y'all. This is a community of learning, a community of practice we're all part of. So we'll also be sharing more information on additional ways that we can all continue to exchange ideas and questions. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, either just launching a program, just trying to make the case, just engaging with the community, just thinking maybe I could do this here? If, you know, briefly, if there's something you could tell folks who want to dive in, what would you tell them?
I'm gonna go first. You guys, I know I've talked twice. Okay. I think the thing that I tell everybody is make friends. So find yourself some allies in, you know, departments that could help you to accomplish what you're trying to do. And, you know, for us, I mentioned the Green Infrastructure Working Group that has, you know, 60 members at this point. But when I was at Boston Water and Sewer and I first started the thing, there were 6 of us. And there were, you know, 6 of us in key departments that did capital work in Boston. So I'd say make friends. And the kind of next steps there are pick a couple of meaningful projects that you want to like maybe tackle first. For us, it was schools. So we did 5 pilot schools first, and that was the first kind of like large installations of green infrastructure in the city of Boston. To Greg's point and to Blue's points, it was showing the community the value of green infrastructure, not just as a stormwater management tool, but as a resource in the schoolyard and as a benefit to the surrounding neighborhood. And so pick a project or two that you think might change hearts and minds and do it, and like do it well. And draw a lot of attention to it. Take a bunch of photos. Like every picture in my presentation is something that I use for like presentations all the time. So we get these photos out in front of people, and you wouldn't believe how often the response is, I did not know green infrastructure could look like that. I did not know that real green infrastructure, like not like a, photoshopped version, looks like this when it's cared for. So it really does help to show like the ultimate kind of value of these features beyond just they help reduce flooding or they remove pollutants, which they do, but they do so much more. So I think make some friends and do a couple of projects that are like really triggering like hearts and mind changes, like really trying, just really go into the corn, right? Like try to make it a project that like people will love.
Thanks so much, Kate. Blue?
Completely agree. I was going to say make friends as well. Greg was one of my first friends at the city of Tucson. He's a great friend to have, and has been such an awesome partner. And along with making friends is like try to do fun things together too. It doesn't necessarily have to be outside of work time, but sometimes having a beer after work is a great way to make friends. I host what I call a GSI Happy Mixer quarterly, where I invite all the people from the city who could touch GSI at any point to a happy hour. And then I also invite all of the contractors and practitioners and designers that we work with. And to get everybody into the same space is absolutely invaluable, because then
Guess what they
everybody's
talk
a
about?
team. That's what you're going to talk about? Okay, I'll
No,
leave it.
no, and guess what they talk about?
Oh, what do they talk about? Beer.
Yeah, no, GSI.
They talk about GSI. It's true. So yes, just building on Kate's make friends, because it really is all about relationships. Working in government is all about relationships. And then I also wanted to kind of build on the whole pilot program piece, like small proof of concept. In Tucson, we're lucky to have a neighborhood that was transformed over the last 20 years by a single individual really working together with his neighbors and community. His name is Brad Lancaster. If you haven't heard of him and you're curious, he's amazing. He's written incredible books about green infrastructure. And in him piloting all of these practices in his own neighborhood before it was legal, he calls it pre-legally, was a demonstration to the city that, this is actually working. This isn't causing problems, it's solving problems. And so little by little, his practices have been institutionalized, and his work is really much of the basis for the program that now exists at the city level.
Very inspiring. Greg, can I give you 30 seconds for the last
30
word
seconds.
before I
Sure.
close it out?
I think look for win-win-wins. When we look for wins that are good for Parks and Recreation, it's also a win for Tucson Water. But then if it's a win for both of us, it's likely a win for the community. So that's look for those early projects are a win for everybody, and then make the public aware of it. Brag about them.
It's great advice from all of you guys. I just want to thank Kate, Blue, and Greg, and Rachel for joining us today and sharing the great work they've been doing on GSI and parks and other public green spaces. We hope you guys have learned some helpful ideas that you can use and adapt for your own communities. Remember that links are going to be sent to the recording, the presentations, additional resources. We're going to mail those out in the next couple of days. Please take a minute to fill out the survey that'll pop up when you leave Zoom. That decides whether or not I get paid. Just kidding. But the feedback is incredibly valuable for us, and we use it to constantly tweak our programming. Speaking of programming, we want to mention that we're going to be having a member exclusive follow-up to this event on January 22nd. It's going to be a peer conversation, so a little less formal, more back and forth, actual talking by all the participants. We're going to be hearing stories from 2 of our other cohort cities, Raleigh and Seattle. You'll get an email when registration's open, and you can visit the events tab on our website, cityparksalliance.org, for more info and to register. If you're interested in continuing education credits for AICP or LACES, if you're a landscape architect, or our general CEU offerings, just look for that in the follow-up email with instructions to how you can get it. Don't forget to visit the initiative website, cityparksalliance.org/stormwater, for the resources that we've shared and many others. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for joining us. Keep up the great work you're doing in our nation's urban parks, and hopefully we'll see you next time.